So when we left off, we had Diarmuid and Grainne cementing their relationship, and the pursuit of Diarmuid and Grainne did not lessen. If anything, it intensified. But now they had Myrna, who was their faithful companion and watch out guy, and they just kept moving. And it came to a point where they were nearly at the edge of the Shannon near Limerick, across from Limerick in County Clare, when they saw a fleet of ships, and it was obvious that these were mercenaries that had been brought in by Finn, and there were very many ships. And then 9 times 9 chiefs hopped out of the ships and marched towards the caves where they were hiding. So Diarmuid decided he'd just meet them head on. Now, he left his armor to one side and he went down and he, as they say, parleyed with said 9 chiefs. And they introduced themselves and they told him that they were coming to look for a brigand and a thief and a very bad man who was called Diarmuid O'Divna. And Diarmuid said, "Oh, haven't heard about him now. Haven't seen anything about it. Never heard of him." So he kept them going and devised a plan to take on this like incredibly large fleet filled with fighting men. And he said, "Would you like to see a trick? Do you have wine on that ship?" They said, "We do." "So get me a ton of wine then." A ton being a barrel of wine, quite heavy. So they brought the ton to Diarmuid, and he pokes a hole in it and he sculls a whole lot of it, and then he passes it around and everybody thinks this is a great thing altogether. He goes, "Now will I show you a feat that you've never seen before?" Oh, they said, "We're very hard to impress." He says, "Well, wait till you see this." So he brought the ton up halfway up a hill, let it go, and then jumped on it and more or less, did a circus trick for them. Well, they were very impressed with this. And they said, "Well, we are champions too, so this kind of a thing isn't below us." And they all tried, and one by one they got crushed by the ton until they got bored of that and went back to their ships. And the next day, he still pretended he didn't know where anybody was, where he didn't reveal his identity. And this time he had them walk on a blade, his longest sword, and he walked from side to side. He put it up on stumps and he walked from side to side, and he kind of like he did 3 big steps on it and jumped off completely unharmed. Well, these chiefs of chiefs who were still waiting for news from their trackers of this Diarmuid decided they'd give it a go too, and one by one they were sliced this way, that way, and the other way. So that didn't go too well for them. And finally, Diarmuid he just decided, well, we can't be doing this all day. So more or less overnight, he decided that he would do battle. And he did what Diarmuid did so well in any other of the stories, like he did with the Quicken Tree, like he did when he was before and behind Finn. And he came out in full battle armor with his 2 great swords and his 2 great spears that Manannán and Angus Og had given him. And he flew above them, below them, around them, slicing everywhere he went. There were heads rolling. There were not a blemish on him. Nobody could get near him. And then it came to the leaders. So most of the men scattered back to the ship, the ones he hadn't killed. And the leaders tried to take him on, but he disarmed each of them in turn and then tied them up with knots that only the Fiona can unloose. And there's a tradition that if one of the captains creates the bonds, only another captain or a high-ranking Fiona can unloose them. And anyway, at the end of the day, he dispatched so many of them that the rest of them took their ships and went back to wherever they came from and decided that this was not a task they were going to succeed in. And so Grainne and himself carried on. Now, Finn caught up to all of this through one messenger who was spared, because Diarmuid knew exactly who she was. And she ran all the way back to Finn's camp and breathlessly told him the whole story of how Diarmuid had pretty much killed, several thousand people. And Finn was incensed and redoubled his efforts and called in more. He called in other Fians, not just the Fianna, but the people like the Clan Morna, the ones from Munster, some of them from Ulster. He just wanted everyone on the island to go and get Diarmuid. His blood was so up. And so as it continued, they were ducking and diving and moving around until Diarmuid reckoned that he might get some respite in the forest of Devros, right, which is up on the Cavan border, I think. And it was an enchanted forest. It was a place that was created when there was an historic match precipitated by two of Manannán mac Lir's daughters, one who had fallen in love and married a half Dedanan, and the other who was completely in the Fey world. And they had a big argument over whether the people of over whether the Gaels were better hurlers or the Dedanans. And so a massive mill of a hurling match was played, and the two a day, they meant they just couldn't get it over the line. And 3 days and 3 nights of hurling, and not one goal was scored, but there were lots of casualties, let's say. Now, during that match, one of their musicians accidentally, and the people of the sea of the Sidhe had brought with them nuts and berries and other provisions. And it so happened that one of the musicians, a harper who could make the most beautiful sound from an ivy leaf, as it turns out, accidentally dropped a rowan berry. Didn't pay any heed. And at the end of the 3 days, the two a day decided that there was no way they could win. So they withdrew. They withdrew the challenge and they went back under the ground. But a year later, 2 years later, somebody spotted a magnificent rowan tree. They knew it by the fragrance of it, by the look of it. And this was a magical otherworld berry. And if anybody ate of the rowan tree, they would be healed from illness. A woman with, let's say, less desirable attributes would become incredibly beautiful. A man of 100 would suddenly become 30, and so on and so on. There was talk that it would give immortality, but we never found out if that happened. And so the two a day were very angry about this part of their bounty being in the Gaels' world. And so they went and found a very fearsome, some say he was half Fomorian, giant, who was willing to guard the tree with all his life. He would sleep in the tree at night, and during the day he'd be in the tree, and at night he'd be at its base. And this strange creature also had a body of iron, which meant that he was almost impossible to kill, but he did have a weakness at his neck. And he carried an iron club, and he had a horrible big eye in the middle of his forehead, and he was fearsome and gruesome to look at. To all intents and purposes, he was a troll. He had all kinds of strange appendages, but he was big and fierce and ever vigilant. And his whole life was about protecting this one tree in a forest, which had become a wilderness because nobody dared near go there. Diarmuid knew of the forest of Rose, and he approached the giant, whose name was Sharwan, and he asked him if he might take the chance to allow Diarmuid and Grainne a bit of rest. At this stage, Grainne was heavy with child, and she was tired, and they needed space. And would it be all right if they did a little bit of hunting and fishing and built a little, bower to rest in on his lands? And the giant didn't mind so much. He said, okay, but just don't touch the tree, right? You can do anything you want, but don't touch the tree. Not one berry. And Diarmuid agreed faithfully not to touch the berries. Unfortunately, Grainne, as a pregnant woman, had developed a very, very strong taste for rowan berries. And she wouldn't eat. She stopped eating. She needed the rowan berries. So eventually, Diarmuid had to go get them for her, which involved, of course, having to kill this terrible ogre who was very angry that he had broken his bond. Diarmuid did apologize before he disarmed him and killed him with 3 blows of his own club. So he was able to get his berries for his darling, and they climbed up the tree where the berries were even sweeter, and they got into the giant's bed, and they were nice and cozy, and you know what's going to happen next. In the meantime, Finn McCool had given a job to some of the Clan Morna guys, the ones who had killed the clan that had killed his father. Which is wrong of him, because he shouldn't have been extracting Eric's. He'd killed their fathers when those boys were still in the womb. However, they wanted to be part of the bigger picture. So he said, well, look, if you can either kill the giant and bring me some berries or bring me back Diarmuid, yeah, you can have my own armor and you can be full members of my Fiann, not a bother. Which, was a pretty impossible task. So they went and tried to get in and either kill the giant or grab some berries. So to kill the giant and grab some berries or kill Diarmuid. Diarmuid saw them coming, and he explained to them exactly what the tasks involved were, and they knew they'd never kill Diarmuid, so they decided they would go for the berries. And he says, you know what? He plucked a handful of berries and said, look, tell Finn you kill the giant and give him these berries and see what he says. And they did. They came back and they gave Finn a big handful of the juicy magical berries, and Finn is about to neck them until, there's a smell. I can smell Diarmuid a divin off this. You didn't kill Shark. You didn't kill the giant. You're just lily-livered, bloody McMurnace. You can, get away from me, get out of my sight. But then he knew where Diarmuid and Grainne were, so full tilt right to the forest. They go into the forest and they're searching, and all the time Oisin and Diarmuid and Oisin and Oscar and the close friends of Diarmuid are trying their best to hold Finn back, to reason with him, to lessen the flame of it all. Anyway, Finn was just getting more and more annoyed. So they come into the forest of Dravros and they find the quicken tree. And Finn pulls out the fiddle, the chess set, and challenges Oisin to a game. Now, Oisin has never beaten Oscar. Oscar's never beaten Oisin has never beaten Finn. And they play chess. Now, Diarmuid's up the tree, the 2 lads sitting underneath, and he can't help himself. He doesn't want Oisin, he doesn't want Finn to win. So he drops a little berry to just give Oisin a heads up on where to put the next man, where to move on the board. And eventually Oisin beats Finn, and Finn loses it because he knows damn well what's going on. And he roars up at the tree, Diarmuid, I know you're up there. Be a man, show yourself. Diarmuid has no problem showing himself. He stands up with Grainne and he gives her 3 delicious kisses. And now Finn he's ready to cut down the quicken tree. He's that mad. However, he can't because it's enchanted. So what does he do? He calls the Fiona around. The whole place is surrounded. and he's giving orders left, right, and center on how they were going to get this guy out of the tree and be done with him. In the meantime, Angus Og arrives in the middle of the tree and visibly engages with them, offers to take both of them away, and Diarmuid's like, nope, I'm going to stand up to him, take Grainne. And in the meantime, some of the Fiona are being sent up the tree to fight, to get him down. And every time one of them goes up, Diarmuid puts his foot on their head, and Angus changes them into the appearance of Diarmuid. And when they land on the ground, they're immediately hacked into pieces. So, but once they're killed, they assume their true form. And after 9 or so guys, all called Garov, by the way, die, Finn realizes that this is not going to work. So Angus takes, Diarmuid said, take Grainne and take her to the brew. If I don't come back, give her back to her father and take good care of her, Angus. Grainne gives him a kiss and thinks, I'm never going to see him again. But she goes off with Angus. He enfolds her in the hem of his mantle, and they go off to the Brú na Bóinne. In the meantime, Diarmuid decides he's going to take on the Fiona, jumps down, offers to fight anybody man to man. None of his friends want to fight him. All the people who are against him want to fight him. And he fights his way out and escapes. And this goes on. The pursuit of Diarmuid and Grainne goes on with lots of different episodes. There's one particularly that I enjoy, which is in Howth, where they are taking shelter in a cliff high up, and an old woman befriends them and offers to help them and be a lookout and so on and so forth. An older woman, not old. And then one day, a young man approaches the hill and asks after a beautiful woman, and the woman, assuming she means her, parleys somewhat longer. And the young man then talks about, would she be able to find Diarmuid of Duvna? And she, oh yeah, I know exactly where he is. He's up in here in this cliff thing. But in the meantime, she realizes that actually that mightn't have been the best move. So she dips her cloak in salt water in the sea, and she runs up to the cliff and she goes, oh my God, the worst storm you've ever seen in Ireland. The birds can't fly. There's fish being blown in off of the sea across the land. And she made a big long, about 3 pages of a story of how awful this storm was. And Grainne kind of wonders, because she touches the cloak and she tastes salt. Now, if the woman has been coming from the cliffs from up highland, why does she have salty water? So they figure what was going on and they escaped. And there's so many more stories like that. I could keep you for 2 days just telling you about the pursuit. Obviously, I'm not going to do that. So it comes to the point where Finn is actually losing capacity to generate, unlimited army. And he's getting more and more annoyed. And he goes to the underworld. He goes back to the other world. And he searches out his nurse, Bíreog, who you've heard from Karina's telling, his nurse from when he was a child. And he asks her, she's a druid, he asks her for her special help. And Bíreog agrees to help him. And she arrives flying through the air behind a water lily and with a hole in it. And she is sending poisonous and dreadful darts at Diarmuid, who by this time is at Brú na Bóinne, under Angus's protection, or at least Grainne is under his protection. And I mean, she's really hurting him. Diarmuid is getting weaker and weaker until he figures out how he's going to kill her, and he takes his the smaller of the spears and aims it, because he's a deadly shot, right through the hole in the leaf and kills Bíreog, chops her in two. At this point, I think Finn has decided, there's so little he can do. He's just, constantly repelled. And Angus, too, is getting tired of the whole thing. So Angus approaches Finn and says, can we talk about a truce? I mean, this had gone on for years at this point. They traversed Ireland up and down, so much so that every dolmen was called the bed of Diarmuid and Grainne. There was just, it got to the point of being, absurd. And Finn was getting tired and his resources were running low. So he kind of said, oh, maybe. Angus went to Cormac MacArt, said, can we do something? Can we bring these young people and give them some comfort and, root room? Finally, Cormac MacArt said, I think we should. Eventually, Angus was able to broker a deal. And the deal was that Diarmuid and Grainne would get several tracts of land. The lands of his father Dunn, which are in Keshcoran, and that Finn would get a large dowry, bride price, in return for him having Grainne's sister as his wife. So everybody was supposed to be happy. Diarmuid and Grainne moved to Keshcoran. Diarmuid built up a beautiful dune. They were very prosperous. They had the best black cattle in Ireland. The children prospered. They had 4 boys and a wee girl. And they really did settle well and develop safety. And they were deeply, deeply in love. And all was well. Several years later, Grainne realised that for all their happiness, they hadn't ever had Cormac MacArt, her father, come visit, nor had they had any of Diarmuid's, former companions. And she kind of knew that Diarmuid was sorry for that and sad about that. He wasn't exactly, the best settled man in every regard. And so Grainne sent out invitations in a fit of complete optimism. She invited all the high-ranking Fiona and her father's court. And she prepared for a year and a day the most amazing feast. She brought in, you name it, every delicacy, everything you could import, the most brilliant wine, the most delightful mead, and so on and so forth. And at the end of it, she had a mighty feast that apparently went on for a year and a day as well. And at the end of it, she felt that things had been repaired. However, shortly after that feast, there was a mighty battle cry held from very near where they lived in a place called Benbulben. And Diarmuid woke up and said, I've got to go to this. This is the Fiona, I can hear it. And Grainne knew this was a bad idea. She said, I don't know, Diarmuid, maybe just wait to be invited. And no sooner had she said that than Finn showed up at the door saying, will you join us? We're having a hunt. But there was no love in his eyes. And Diarmuid readily agreed, but he took the weaker of his 2 weapons. He didn't take on the gay Dara. He didn't take the sword that couldn't miss. He didn't take his best armaments, even though Grainne pleaded with him to go like full, go with everything you've got. He's like, come on, I'm with the lads. We're going for a hunt. What's up? Off he went with Finn, and on the summit of Benbulben, it turns out that they were hunting a giant boar. And apparently the boar was now hunting the men. And Finn turns to Diarmuid and says, well, you better go home, lad. It's a boar. It's not for you. But he'd already got Diarmuid's blood up, and Diarmuid's, the memories of being in the Fiona and the love he had and the hunt, it all came flooding back, and his pride wouldn't let him turn around, even though he knew. He kind of knew. Anyway, the boar came charging at them. Diarmuid did his best with his sword. The sword broke. he flung the spear bounced off the animal. The boar charged at him straight into his gut. He managed to kill him, the boar, with the hilt of his broken sword, but sure, it was too late. And he lay there with his guts spilling out on Ben Bulben, surrounded by the close men of the Fiona. And he asked Finn to help him. He says, Finn, with those hands, you know that if any water that comes out of your hands is healing water. And Finn went to the nearest river, and he grabbed some water. And as he was coming back, he suddenly remembered how angry he was, and his hands went into fists, and the water fell through him. And he came to Diarmuid, and Diarmuid went, man, you gotta do this. Just get me some water. So he went back to the river a second time, and he cupped his hands, and he had the water in his hands. And nearly as he was almost at Diarmuid, the same thing happened. This shudder, his body wouldn't let him do it. He was still an angry man, and he let the water run through his fingers. Now at this point, Oisín took a sword to his own father's neck and said, do it, or I swear I will take your head off your shoulders. So he went back to the river one more time. And as he came to the mouth of his dying former comrade and friend, Diarmuid, and let the water drip into his mouth, he was just 2 seconds too late. And Diarmuid died right there and then. And 3 great cries from the depths of their soul, the Fiona went up so loud that Angus at the brew heard it, and he came rushing to the scene. The men were there. They'd lifted Oisín and Oscar. They'd lifted him high, and we were ready to honor their comrade, their fallen comrade. But Angus said, no, this is my boy. I have known him since he was 9 months old. He's coming home with me. And with that, he took his old foster son and he spirited him back to Brunaboyne. He said, I can't bring him back from the dead, but I will put a spirit in him so I'll be able to talk to him every day. And that, my friends, is what happened to Diarmuid. Grainne, for her part, there's several people tell several different conflicting stories. One is that she trained her children to defeat Finn and made it her life's work to pursue him. Another is that she came to truce terms with Finn, and they rubbed along separately but left each other alone. And the third is that she decided, in order to save her children, the best policy would be to actually marry Finn and diffuse the situation so that there would be no danger to her children. So you can pick whichever one of those 3 endings you like. And that, my friends, is the story of the pursuit of Diarmuid and Grainne.